From Boyle Heights in Los Angeles, California, Libros Schmibros Lending Library presents the Latinidad Beyond Borders podcast. Latinidad encompasses the diverse experiences of people who live in Latin America, as well as people of Latin American descent who live in the United States. This podcast explores culture, society, and politics across the Americas through the lens of Latinidad. Welcome to another episode of Latinidad Beyond Borders. I'm your host, Alberto Sahagún. My guest today is Marie Arana. She was editor-in-chief of the Washington Post literary section, Book World, and also the inaugural literary director of the Library of Congress. She's written a memoir, novels, works of biography and history, as well as numerous articles for major newspapers. Her latest book is called Latinoland, a portrait of America's largest and least understood minority. It came out last year in 2024 and is now available in paperback. So welcome to the show, Marie. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, Alberto. Please call me Marisi. That's what my friends call me and my family calls me. And you're a friend in a family, so.
Thank you, Marisi.
Marisi.
Okay, so your latest book, it examines the Latino experience in the United States by combining individual profiles of Latinos of diverse backgrounds with broader discussions about history, society, and culture. And you talk about the United States and Latin America. You conducted hundreds of interviews for this book. Some Latinos you talked to were immigrants. Some had been in the United States for many generations. Their families had been in the US for many generations. You also talk about your own life and your family's experience immigrating to the United States. You were born in Peru and came to the US first as a young child. So talk about your experience of your immigrant experience. And you came during a time when the Latino community was much smaller than it is today. And you talk about this in your book. So share some of those experiences of you and your family of coming to the US.
Thank you so much, Alberto. Yes, it seems so long ago now. My goodness, it was in the 60s, early. And the United States was a different place. And I remember being told in where I grew up. I was born in Lima, Peru, but I grew up north on the coast, very close to Trujillo, in a very small little community. And I was always told that, the United States was going to be clean, pure, pristine, beautiful, everything, every river you could drink from, all of that beauty that I was expecting. And in fact, we walked into a time when in the United States where there was a lot of trouble. There were, of course, the Vietnam War had begun. The protests were huge. The civil rights struggle was on. Children were being hosed, because they were African Americans. And there were the series of assassinations. So it was, in a way, a very tough time to arrive in this country. At the same time, we were so alone in a sense because in the community that we came to in New Jersey, there were very few. In fact, my family was the only one in town that was, at least that I knew, that was Hispanic. And my brothers and my sisters were the only ones that I could speak Spanish to, unless I was in a Spanish classroom in school. So it was a kind of a shock to come to a place that was so troubled at the time. And at the same time, there was this sense that I had to become a completely different person, which I did. At that point, the as a child, you want to belong. And so I would walk out the door, leaving my Hispanic identity behind and just try to become as American as possible. And that was really the defining point because I arrived at the age of 9. By 12, I was so totally American and had been sort of trained not to show my Hispanicity, my Latinidad, to the outer world. And it went like that for school, university, on my first jobs. And then finally came to, I think, the question you would ask me, which is, um, you know, at what point did you actually return to that little girl?
Yeah, yeah. And you also talk about the reasons your family came to the US, and every immigrant to the US, migrant to the US, has a different reason for coming to the US. Many looking for a better opportunity, but your reasons, your family's reasons were a bit more complicated, maybe?
Absolutely. My mother was American. She had been an immigrant to Peru and had lived in Peru for many, many years. And she had decided that it was now her turn and for her husband to come to the United States. It was also a question of education because, as I said, we were living in this very small community. My mother was our teacher. So she got to the point, there was no appropriate school for us to go to in this little village that we lived in. It was a sugar, basically a sugar hacienda community where my father was an engineer. And so the education opportunities were not great. And so that was when my parents decided, okay, let's do this for the children. And it was really for that reason. And we all expected to go back because my mother had said, just for a while, let's go to my side of the world. And so it was for us just a temporary thing. And then it became, of course, our entire lives to stay here and to make a life here.
Yes, yes. And you became a part of Latinoland. So that's the title of your book. So talk about how you came to that title. And I've heard you actually talk about this in when you were doing a presentation at the Library of Congress that really struck me, how it connected to your family.
Yes, absolutely. Well, as I say, I ignored my Latinidad for a long time because I was just trying to make it in school, make it in university. I went to a university in the Midwest, Northwestern University, where I really didn't see any Latinos like me at all. So it was more of the same. And then going to work in a publishing house in New York, where there was no sense that any books for Latinos would be interesting to the publisher. So I was doing all sorts of books and that would interest everybody else but Latinos. And every time I brought up a Latino subject, it was like, oh, well, um, there's no market for that. So what happened was when I went to work at the Washington Post, they were really interested in my Latinidad. They said, "Well, wow, you were born in Peru. You're a Latina. Can you help us with understanding this burgeoning community around Washington D.C.?" Which I did. So it was that began, and I already was middle aged. That began my whole interest, and my work in the beginning was a slew of books on South America, on Latin America, on the Caribbean, on the place where we had come from, because I didn't think Americans knew enough about us and our origins. So I wanted to write books about the origins and the history and something that people could learn about Latinos. So finally, I had run out of subjects on Latin America, and it became very clear to me that this was a Latin American country. This was, the largest population, 65 million people who have Latino heritage, who and Spanish-speaking people. We are the largest Spanish-speaking country in the world, second only to Mexico. So think about that. We're larger than the country that I came from, Colombia, Venezuela, Argentina, anywhere you want to say, except Mexico. We are a nation of people, really. So I decided to write Latinoland. It was not always called Latinoland. When I first started, I was struggling to get a name, and I had the most foolish names that my editor kept turning down. My agent kept saying no good. They were plain, bland. There was nothing sparkling about them. And I was really in the doldrums trying to figure this out because my publisher had wanted this book pretty quickly. From the very beginning, they said this is a book that we want pretty quickly. And so I had finished the manuscript and I still had no title. I have a very good friend. One of my very, very dear friends is Sandra Cisneros, whom, as you know, Alberto is a big, huge name in Latino literature. And Sandra came to Washington, and she called me up and she said, "I'm coming to Washington, and I want to see you, and it's your birthday, so next week, so let's get together." We got together. We went to an Indian restaurant in Washington, D.C. I met her there. And there she was with her little braids and her absolutely fantastic Mexican garb, which she always wears and believes in the fact that you should represent your culture in that way. And there she was, and she was sitting there, and I sat down, we hugged, she said, "Happy birthday." And then she said, "You don't look so happy. What's going on?" And I said, "Well, my book is publishing soon, but I don't have a title for it." And she said, "Oh, well, let's fix that." So she said, "Here's what you do. You go home tonight and you put on your pajamas and you get into bed and you turn off the lights and you look at the ceiling and you try to conjure. This is such a Latino story. You try to conjure the person you love most. It could be a thing that you love most, but the person would be better. You think of a person that you love most and you hold that image in your head until you fall asleep. And you fall asleep asking that image your question. And when you wake up, you will have your answer." So that night, I go home, I put on my pajamas, I get into bed, I turn off the lights, I look at the ceiling, I think of the person I love most without any reservations, and I ask that person my question. I go to sleep. The next morning, I wake up, and the first thought in my head is Latinoland. I am not kidding you, Alberto. It was Latinoland. That's not the end of the story, though. The end of the story, it goes on, is within days, I get a call from my editor in New York. And he says, "You've got to come to New York, come up right away because I need to tell you some things." So I go to New York. I sit down with my editor. I'm in a restaurant. And he says to me, "Here's the thing. We are speeding up the publication of your book because we want it to come out before the election. It's very important that it comes out before the election because it contains so much information on the Latino population and we should know about it and we should expect from it." So I said, "Well, that's fine." He said, "But yeah, you don't understand. You're going to have to read your galleys pages in 2 days. You're going to have to sign off on the proofs in 2 days. You're going to have to speed everything up and you're going to have to not do anything else but this." And I said, "Well, that's fine. And I will try." And he says, so I say, "Well, when is the publication? What's the publication date?" And he says, "February 20th. And I almost fall out of my chair, Alberto, because February 20th is my father's birthday. And my father's birthday is the day is my father was the person I was thinking of when I was looking up at the ceiling, asking him the question, what is the title of this book? So, as Sandra is so fantastic because she's maybe a bruja, she's half, some shaman. And she knew that if I did this, I would get an answer from my father. And I did. This is only happens in Latino land, these stories.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story. So by Latino land, as I understood it, Latino land represents a nation that's within the nation of the United States, but it's a nation that's not separate from the United States. It coexists and commingles with the United States, but from what I understand, it meaning is that it reflects a bond that most Latinos feel, though they come from different nations, that they have some shared community, right? So that's kind of how I understood Latinoland. Is that kind of what sort of what you were driving at?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think this is a product of our times, Alberto, because in former times when the Germans came over, or the big the Swedes came over, the Irish came over, or the Jewish diaspora came over, there was a sense that you had left your land behind because you could not communicate easily with your land. You could not return very easily. You could not communicate very easily. You were not in touch. And so there was this sense, of course, most of these populations were white, European, and so they blended into the population very easily. But with the Latinos, we largely have come. I mean, we were 2.5 million when I came as a 10-year-old. We're now 65 million. So within my lifetime, we have burgeoned. The Latinos were always here all the way back from before the Pilgrims on this territory. But we have really grown in the past 40, 50 years. And so during that time, the global communications has just exploded. And we are able to be in touch. I mean, we're able to WhatsApp call anybody in our country of origin and be in touch. We send remittances like nobody has sent remittances. Those are the money that you send back to your origin country to help out. And this is, in some cases, in the case of Honduras, or the case of Guatemala, or the case of El Salvador, these have been life-saving for the countries to have these remittances sent back by American Latinos. So this is a very different time. And all of that means that we hang on to that identity more than former immigrants to this country. And that identity is very strong for us when we hold on to the language. I would say even the Asian Americans who have come over here, they have adapted in very different ways because the language is not always kept. But for us, the language and the culture and the food, all of these things we keep up. We manage to keep up, and the representation of people who actually speak Spanish at home is huge. It's a very large percentage of us. So even through the generations, we hold on to some of it. Even the people who lose their language hold on to the culture. They hold on to the ways, the music, the food, all sorts of cultural celebrations, but they may not have the language. But still, we hold on to it far more because of the sort of global communications that we have today.
Yes, and with the growth of the Latino population in the United States comes more political power and influence. And we saw that the Latino vote was crucial to last year's election in 2024. Of course, Donald Trump won the presidency, and each time he ran for president, he improved with Latino voters. And you talk about this in your book, that though Latinos tend to lean Democratic, that many Latinos identify with conservative values, and that Republican presidents, those who win, normally do relatively well with Latinos, such as Nixon, you talk about, and Reagan, George W. Bush. But the difference with Trump is that, Reagan and W. Bush were relatively pro-immigration compared to today's Republican Party. Trump ran very aggressively on anti-immigration, yet he got a big share of Latino voters. So how do you interpret that? How do you explain what's going on here?
Well, I do think that the conservative values is really important here. I think that The economy is huge. If you ask the Latinos in a wide scale, as you know, the Pew Research Center has done, the most important thing to us is jobs and the economy and making sure that we can put food on the table. Latinos are the biggest, most sort of electrically growing population of of small business owners in the country by a wide margin. We set up more businesses than anybody else. So the economy, work is very important to us. And of course, that's what was promised in this past election was an improvement in the economy, a sort of vast opportunities that had not been there before. And that's what we're looking at now. We're waiting for that. You know, that is something that Latinos did vote for. Also, you have to say that I think the Latinos who are here, and this is very true, nationwide, are as alarmed by the great numbers of people coming over the border. And, you know, I think we're conservative in that way as well. We're also most likely to change parties from election to election. And I think that that's very much what happened in this election because there was a kind of surfeit of, you know, we've had it with the sort of identity politics. Latinos are not necessarily, you know, I think the Democratic Party has assumed that we love identity politics, that we love the whole diversity, equity, and inclusion thing. But that's not the most important thing to us. The most important thing to us is really the economy and education for our children. And those are overwhelmingly the issues that we care about. And so when that wasn't working with the Democrats in power, that was an impetus for the population to change its vote, which we do all the time. We vote for the person, for the moment, rather than for the party. I think the Democratic Party has assumed so much that we would be natural, you know, adherents to the Democratic Party's policies, but we're not. I mean, we will change to whatever is actually advantageous for those two things for us: work, education. Also, the third thing, security. When somebody talks about making this a more secure place with more police protection, all of that sort of thing, that appeals to us. That's the third most important thing. So it makes great sense to me, and I said this in the book, that the Republican Party is really, really making great advances in the Latino population this time.
Right, right. And so this is so but this is a divide within the Latino community, which, as you point out many times, you shouldn't assume they're of one mind because some Latinos see Trump as fundamentally anti-Latino, right? And see his anti-immigrant rhetoric as being directed at all Latinos. But other Latinos hear something different, right?
Right.
And yes, as the reality is that some Latinos don't think immigration is the biggest issue and don't necessarily, for different reasons, feel that sympathetic, especially to more recent immigrants. I've heard interviews of people who even came to the US undocumented many years ago, were able to get citizenship, and they divide the recent immigrants from past immigrants and kind of believe the rhetoric that these newer immigrants, that there's a lot of criminality and things like that. So yeah, that's something to pay attention to going forward about, right, these diverse political views within the Latino community, right? And I think, as you said, you know, if Trump doesn't deliver with the economy, a lot of those Latino voters, they're going to try the other party, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. We can very, very easily predict that.
Yeah. And finally, you talk about how when you entered uh, publishing and journalism, there weren't many Latinos. You talk in the book how in the last 10, 15 years, we see more Latinos in the media, but still Latinos are underrepresented. And you mentioned diversity initiatives, and this current administration is pushing to end any kind of diversity initiatives in in government and in the private sector. And it seems like corporations are going along with that. So how do you think we can increase Latino representation in the media so that Latino stories are given the attention they deserve?
Well, as you sort of hinted at right now, Alberto, you have generations of immigrants now who may have come as undocumented. There's a whole community outside of Washington, D.C. of Peruvians like me. These are Peruvians who came from the Andes, from little villages in the mountains, and from a certain village in the mountains, and they started coming about 70 years ago. And they came as undocumented. They came over the border. They set up a community. They take care of each other. They're extraordinarily tight and community oriented. I mean, they bring each other along. When somebody is sick, they all bring something. They cook something. They all get together. And what this community has done over the years is raise children who are now lawyers, doctors, professors, writers like me, like you. And in the course of two or three generations, there has been this solidity, right? And they have lived the American dream, as it were. But the initial ones, the grandparents, great grandparents, came as undocumented people. They have just changed this life for themselves completely. So you have this, as you call it, the past and the current. You have a past population that has come perhaps under the same circumstances, crossing the border and everything else, but they have actually made good on the American dream. And they, of course, naturally, it's a human impulse to preserve what they've done, and not be the undocumented who are necessarily committing crimes. And by the way, those are very few. When you compare the crimes that have been committed by recent immigrants and documented immigrants, they pale in comparison to white crime, pale in comparison to it. And you when you look at the numbers, you see this mass fabrication of the idea that somehow we are villains and criminals. It's so rare, actually. So there is that. Where we've come to in the present tense, which when you throw all of this vitriol and sort of nefarious language into the conversation, you twist obviously you twist the facts and you twist the truth. But if you look at the actual numbers of the people who have been here, who have actually improved, we are the population that generation by generation improves their lot the most, no question about it. And if we looked at those numbers instead of the very few, news flashes that you see here and there, you would understand that this is a population that is an engine of productivity.
Right. And your book emphasizes, I think, presenting role models, which in history that a lot of people don't know about, that can serve as an inspiration for people to go increase their numbers in all these different fields, right?
Absolutely right. Yes. I mean, history is with us. If you look at the history that I present in the book, that we were there, we were part of the origin story of this country. No question about it. We were there in the beginning, and we have been there in every generation. When you just look at the military contributions that we have made, they're enormous. So, to your question of do we need this sort of diversity programs, we are to the point now, so many generations later, of having a great meritocracy among us. I mean, we merit the jobs, we merit the attention, we merit getting into the best universities at this point. And a helping hand. I mean, I think this might have been part of the thinking of Latinos in the election as well. I mean, we can make it on our own. That is the sensation that we've always had. That is the belief that we've always had, that we can make it on our own. We can make the small businesses. We can live by being ingenious, by actually developing something that other people need that we can produce. And so that sense of that we're going to be a burden on the government, or that we are going to take, we're going to be welfare cases, is just not true among us.
Yes. Well, thank you for being on the show. Thank you so much. And I look forward to your next book.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
And
Alberto.
uh, and also, hopefully, in the future, we can talk about Peru, which I
Love
think
you.
is something that a country that we need to learn more about in the United States.
Absolutely. I would love that. Thank you, Alberto. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Bye.